The interest in meditation and mindfulness has never been bigger in my lifetime than it is right now. Every airport I'm in, there's 3 books on meditation in the airport bookstore. Everyone I know has at least 1 or 2 meditation apps on their phone. There's TED Talks and Google Talks and speakers and keynote speakers talking about mindfulness and how meditation saved their life. And it's really exciting, except that, unfortunately, it's mostly talk. Very few people are actually practicing. It's really not happening. It's mostly a lot of talk and apps and books being sold, and not a lot of people sitting down on the floor, crossing their legs and closing their eyes. And you know why? Because it's really hard and it's really intimidating. And your worst friend is your own mind at 10:30 at night right before bed. Really, it's an evil place. I don't recommend visiting it without some guidance. And this is what meditation confronts us with very often. Each and every year that passes, there's more and more research released on the benefits of meditation, whether it's reducing stress hormones like cortisol, whether it's lengthening your telomeres, which are an indication for longevity, whether it's creating a sense of peace or calm or reducing anxiety or depression. Pretty clear link that mindful practices of all types really improve these things, but how do you really follow through? Well, most people don't. There's a couple of tricks people use. We, of course, teach yoga breathing here at Yoga Body, which I find very effective because it gives you something to do, and it's a lot more predictable in terms of the outcome. There are other options as well. A lot of you have guided meditation apps on your phone, which people tend to burn through and then burn out of, which in a couple of weeks, which, hey, if you get a couple of weeks out of it, that's great. There's a third option, which not many people are using, but I'd encourage you to experiment with it because it might work for you. And this is frequency following music, binaural beats, brain entrainment music. It's an old technology that has suddenly come back into popularity. It's relatively simple. It's suddenly now affordable. A big part of it was for many years it was very, very expensive. But now you can even get access to free stuff on YouTube or Spotify. And for me, at least, at certain times, it's really, really helped me. Now, user beware, there are very different responses and there's different people making this stuff, and some people know what they're doing and some people don't. And some of these tracks, with all the best intentions, will give you a little bit of anxiety, and some of them might give you nightmares, but some of them will really help to calm you down and focus, and it's really simple. It's not woo-woo at all. It's a really simple technology where you put on a pair of headphones and one frequency goes in one ear, another frequency goes in the other ear, and your brain matches it, and it can really take you from a beta down to an alpha state very, very quickly. I'd encourage you to experiment with these. I'll link up to some resources in the show notes where for no cost you can experiment with some of these. Welcome to the Lucas Rockwood Show. I'm your host. If you have never been here before, I am a yoga teacher, I'm a trainer, a serial entrepreneur, I'm into nutrition. But first and foremost, I'm a student, and this show is a way for me to go out in the world and learn things. Interesting people, smart people, and I take their research and I bring it to you on the show to hopefully help you live a more fulfilled, more inspired life. On this week's show, I'll be meeting with a musical composer, a producer, and he's become an expert in binaural beats. He's also a meditation teacher. I think you'll find it really valuable. If you'd like to write to me or write into the show with questions or comments, podcast@yogabody.com. If you'd like to support the show, here's what you do. You just share it. It really means a lot to me. You share it on social, say, hey friends, check out this weird Lucas Rockwood guy, and you can tag me if you'd like. My handle is Lucas Rockwood. Thanks for listening. Enjoy. So hello and welcome everyone. Today's show is called Binaural Beats and Meditation. I am joined here with Cory Allen. Cory's an author, a podcast host, a meditation teacher, and an audio engineer from Austin in Texas. His first book just came out, Now is the Way. It was just released, and he studied and produced music for over 15 years. So music, meditation combo, which is what we'll be chatting about today. He's released over a dozen albums, lots of different genres. You can learn more about his work, his book, his audios at Cory Allen, A-L-L-E-N. It's a hyphen in the middle, Cory-Allen.com. Cory, welcome to the show.
Thanks a lot, man.
So binaural beats, I got into this, I guess it was like back in 2005 or something like that. This is like, pre-Spotify days, and even YouTube wasn't very big. I think YouTube launched in 2006 or something, but a friend had these HoloSync CDs, and he'd paid something crazy like $1,500 for them, and he's like, I'll make you a bootleg of these CDs, and I copied them, and then I sat there in my room and I listened to these things, and they really just totally bugged me out. I didn't really do the training properly, so I didn't know what I was doing. And apparently there's different levels and things like that. And for some reason, I just didn't put much stock into into frequency following music and binaural beats, and I just thought it was kind of a gimmick. But my buddy was really into it, so I stuck these headphones on, and I think I always just kind of overcommit to things. I think I did it for like 21 days in a row or something like that. And I just had crazy lucid dreams, psycho. I mean, I was doing it all wrong. I would listen to like level 1, 2, 3, 4 all in a row and fall asleep listening to these things. And so I never really had a lot of training. It wasn't until a couple of years later that I actually started learning the science behind frequency following music, binaural beats, and other stuff. And I still only understand the science on a really superficial level. But for people listening who are new to this concept, you're an audio engineer, you're a music guy, and obviously you're now focusing on meditation. Give people a little bit of background about what this whole thing is. Most people listening have not heard of binaural beats or frequency following music.
Yeah, man. I mean, in the most simplified form, our brains, based on what physiological state that we're in, if we're in a sleeping state, if we're in a highly active flow state, what happens in the brain is that neurons send electrical signals through synapses to other neurons, and that's how our thoughts arrive and how our brain operates and so on. And so the speed in which those signals are passed are called brain waves, and they relate to the state that we're in the moment. As I mentioned earlier, in a sleep state, they're going to be firing very slow. Whenever we're in a high functioning state, they're going to be firing really fast. And so the idea behind binaural beats is that you will play tones in one ear and then different tones in another ear. And the vibrations, since sound travels in waves, they're all vibrating in particular frequencies. And so the difference between those two frequencies colliding creates a vibration, which is called beating in music composition. You could think about that, or anyone listening could think of if they hit like a black key and a white key right next to each other on a piano, how that wobbling sound, that's beating, because the waves of sound for each of those notes that are moving are not lining up in syncing. So it's creating this vibration, And so that's basically what happens that's what's happening with the binaural beats. And then the idea is that as our brain attempts to make up the difference in those two frequencies, the brain waves and the speed in which our neurons are firing electrical signals are then entrained into the target frequency that is designed into the binaural beat, with the ultimate effect of being able to entrain your brain into different brainwave states. So if you're trying to do something very active or focus or what have you, you could put on one that, probably a gamma or an alpha or something like that, that's going to attempt to entrain your brain into a higher state. And most people, maybe it's just the world I'm involved in, but most people seem to be interested in extremes, which is basically either this gamma state, which is really high functioning, or a very deep state, delta state, which is for sleep or for meditation. And as you mentioned, on my site, I have a couple of different sets that I've created which are for meditation, and another for deep work, which it's kind of a code word for deep inner exploration. And I had a lot of requests over the last few years, people asking me, like, if I, for like a psychedelic journey or some deep marathon meditation or some, float tank marathon session, could you create a binaural beat for that? And so that's sort of what the deep work ones are all about. And those are a bit longer in duration. And then I collaborated, I'm bad with time, but maybe 5 years ago, I created some with a friend of mine named Aubrey, and we put those on his site. And there's a whole variety of those over there as well, which have a bit more varied target states.
And so I once had binaural beats described to me as if, you got a DJ doing a bad mix, right? Mixing two tracks together, and the tracks aren't syncing up. And some dude is standing on the dance floor just clapping his hands, trying to get the DJ to find that beat, and your brain is kind of clapping, trying to find that beat where they're not syncing up. And that clap that you're trying to clap is the desired frequency of your brainwave. This is a real layman's explanation, but is that somewhat accurate?
Yeah, it's a funky way to describe it, but yeah, I feel like that's in the ballpark. Yeah.
And it's really important that you have headphones for binaural beats specifically because there are different frequencies going into each ear, correct?
Right, right.
And that's not necessarily the case for like frequency following music, which is a bit simpler.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a kind called isochronic tones, which I do use those sometimes. Those are kind of monaural beats. So say you didn't have headphones or you want to listen to them underwater or something like that. But all this is you think about some of this to someone who is completely unfamiliar with this. It may sound a bit bizarre, particularly even like, oh, well, vibrating tones are going to change the way I think and feel. And there's been a large amount of research studies. I'm involved in some research studies in universities in Australia right now that are basically they're doing fMRI scans and playing binaural beats and just looking how they can affect anxiety, PTSDs, and different things like that, and change those have long effects. But if you look at, let's just roll the clock back, even a few hundred years, you think about an isochronic tone. It's like, well, what is a single tone that's going bow, wow, 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 like in front of me, not even in headphones? Why would that have an effect? And then realize that what is a gong? You think about at the top of a temple in Tibet, whenever they ceremonially hit this gong, what does it do? It goes. It's the exact same thing. This is, and if you also look at shamanism, and the more ancient schools of shamanism using the same consistent drumming technique. It's once again, it's an isochronic technique to create this pulsation, which the speed of that pulsation, entrains and truly does have an effect on consciousness.
Yeah, they say like music is the ultimate art form. I've lived abroad now for most of my adult life, 16 years. So I've been in a bunch of different countries. It doesn't really matter where you go. You put on like the Beatles or something, everybody starts kind of rocking their head. Like it just works. I have this little hand drum at home. It's kind of like a version of a hung drum. It has just a really resonant sound. And I have a 5-month-old baby, and I'll just hit that note, and he just lights up. He'll be from crying, he'll just go completely silent. I can play for an hour, and he'll just sit there. And I guess what's interesting about it is you can think whatever you want about music, but it just affects people yes or yes. You don't have to take an art history class to appreciate it. You don't have to be a certain age or anything like that. Like you mentioned, a gong or a bongo drum or a Beatles song or whatever, it just hits people in the heart. It's just like this really magical. I always say in yoga classes, I always tell teachers you have to be super careful with the music that you play because it's basically like this emotional hand grenade that you're just throwing at people. So people, recklessly put on some song that they haven't really thought about, and suddenly they're just slamming their students with an emotional tirade from their angsty youth or from some cognitive experience from 20 years ago or whatever it is.
Yeah, for sure, man. I mean, that's one of the things that I've been a lifelong obsessive with music, and one of the things that has fascinated to me about it, whenever I realized it, you really can. And I think through my turbulent teen years, I very much used music as a form of medicine, and I don't even mean that in like a woo way. I mean that just that if I was feeling a certain way, I could listen to a certain song and it would change the way I felt, and the more I thought about that, I realized that you mentioned these other forms of art, and music is the only form of art that actually touches your body. Like you can look at a painting, you can read a book, but music, the sound waves of the music coming out of your speakers are actually flowing through air and touching and pressing your body and going into your brain and resonating. And that's the interesting thing about it, is that I think about this with all forms of music. You could say the Beatles or whatever else you mentioned, but the overall like harmonic resonance of any band's music or any artist or whatever it is, their sound has this particular like vertically stacked harmonic frequencies happening. And so you play that, and we're like tuning forks. Our nervous system are like tuning forks, and do those things, those sounds that are coming into us, do they resonate with us, and how do they make us feel, good, bad, etc. I've got to where I very much listen to music kind of from the the from my gut or from my ear heart, these days, as opposed to on a more technical level a lot of times, because I'm listening like beneath the surface of the thing as to what's coming through, as opposed to just kind of the more tactile nature of the sound. But that's why, it's such a, as you mentioned, it's such an incredible form of creation, because you can know what like spirituality means to someone like a Christian person in the South when you listen to gospel without being. You can be an atheist and you can listen to that and go, oh, I feel the energy that's coming through there. I get what they mean by spirituality. Or you can listen to an Indian raga and not be Hindu and still feel the sound coming through that raga and go, oh man, I know what it feels like when they say they're touching source or whatever it might be. So yeah, it's an incredible form that transcends time and language and culture and everything.
Yeah, I think the access to music that we have right now, people just don't talk enough about how amazing it is. And I was a kid, I had 16 CDs stacked up in my closet, and all I wanted was more. And now I just, Spotify is on my phone. It's just incredible. I never get over it. Every Monday my new suggested playlist comes out. It's just random, obscure one song that I just find amazing. I've no one to talk to about it. So it's just a really interesting time for music. Pretty terrible time for artists to make a living, I imagine, too. But
yeah,
there's an upside for the consumer. But talk to me about the headphones thing. So, I teach a lot and I taught a lot in yoga rooms. And so we'd always want stuff we could put over our speakers. And of course, binaural beats don't work that way. That's why I started learning about frequency following music and these kinds of things. But for somebody who wants to experiment with this, and again, it's really similar. We've talked a lot about this show on the show about breathing, right? So naturally, your breath kind of mimics your nervous system state, but you can reverse that. You can breathe as if you're cool, calm, and collected, and your nervous system tends to respond in kind. And similarly, in the same way that your nervous system is a certain way now, when you listen to certain music, very often it'll put you in a deep state. And if you just want to question that, at least somebody of my generation, you just put on like some 1990s grunge music, or you put on some something really heavy, like you'll feel that immediately. And and so for people who are new to this kind of thing and they really do want to experience it, do you recommend people start with headphones? Do you recommend they start with something, these isochronic tones that you mentioned, or what do you recommend?
Yeah, definitely headphones. And just first, like with anything, whenever I talk about meditation or whatever it might be, like really just lower the stakes in your mind and try and release your expectations or the kind of the story that you've told yourself about how it should be. And just put them on, put on some headphones, maybe lay down in the bed, close your eyes, and just listen to one, that is intended for meditation or for relaxation or something like that. And, listen for 5, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, and just decompress a little bit and just see empirically if you feel a little different than you would have if you didn't have that playing. And I think that's the best way for someone to test the experience and to see what they're actually getting out of it.
As I mentioned, when I first got into this, I was doing these holosync recordings, and I had some positive experiences, but I had some pretty negative experiences too, like really bad nightmares, and I don't normally dream. Really lucid stuff. It kind of troubled me, and when at least back then when I started researching this stuff, I was really pretty convinced that nobody really knew what was actually going on. And of course, anecdotally, if listening to whatever track helps you fall asleep or relax or find peace, go for it. But anecdotally, I was experiencing some stuff that I couldn't really label in terms of good or bad. I just felt kind of scrambled in my brain, and it was really significant. Like it wasn't I'm definitely a responder. I'm like one of these people who a doctor gives you some medication, and you're like, my ears are ringing. Can this be possible? And you read like number 100 on the possible side effects. I respond to everything. Everything works for me, So I'm definitely not a typical person. But I'm curious, do you feel like the science behind it is really understood, or is it more just like with any kind of music, whether it's classical or pop? Is it put it on, see how you feel, decide for yourself?
Yeah, it's emerging right now. As far as the science on it goes, it's over the last probably 10 or 15 years, there have been various tests, but given that I think really ultimately, the evolution of our technology has created these new issues in society, anxiety, depression, the extreme unrelenting stress due to overstimulation and so forth, and a complete inability to regain homeostasis because of kind of the way that we are living these days, or technology is training us to live. And because of that, I think that the horizon of what is being tested in a formal setting is being expanded. And I've really seen, over the just that last handful of years, binaural beats. I like I've been interested in experimenting with them for, almost 20 years now, and there was, over a decade of that, there was kind of radio silence where there weren't really
Yeah.
any out there.
Yeah,
No one's
exactly.
interested, and they've really come back around. And I think it's because of the ailments that are arising, and people are revisiting them. And with that, there have been a lot of studies beginning in the last year or two, and showing good. I get kind of insider information from universities and things like that, because I sort of against my will, became a world-renowned binaural beat creator. It was something that, I joke about that, but it's because my background in music production and composition, and also walking this musical path, at the same time was always walking this inner path, and those two things were always right next door to each other and intermingling. And the music I created for fun, or just for the sake of creativity, always dealt with these elements of human perception, of our, all of the under the hood things about music, listener expectation, musical sleight of hand, all these different ways that, compositional ways I've come up with these techniques to suspend time based upon, in the perception of the listener and so forth. And all of those tools kind of accidentally culminated to this moment where I created a bunch of binaural beats, and they just went kind of viral, with people's interest in them. And since then, it's been pretty nonstop with people asking me about them and stuff like that. So it was one of those things I would have never set out to be like, I'm going to be create these binaural beats and be this guy. But it was the door that opened, then I just happened to be very well prepared for it. And the fact that I have a professional music studio doesn't hurt either. So they're kind of quality from concept to actual end result. But anyway, yeah. So I get a lot of people hit me up and give me information, or ask me to be involved in their studies. And there's a lot of exciting and encouraging results that have come from just not only on an fMRI basis, but also in psychotherapy and in combination with, ketamine treatments and various things like that. I do a lot of commissions for private use or for commercial use. And there's ketamine clinics have had me create like a binaural beat for their patients to use during their infusions. It's like a 90-minute, thing. So it'll help them during that process as well. And then they also have a psychotherapist there at the same time. So really interesting stuff is happening. We're very much in this in my opinion, we're very much in this peak, or this beginning moment, the crest of this wave of integrative medicine. And I think it's going to be really interesting what happens over the next 10 or 15 years.
And how did you first get into meditation? And is there a specific style that you got into, or how did it start?
Yeah, I got basically out of necessity and chance, in the late 90s. I, just because of my family ecosystem was not great. I had a lot of anxiety, a lot of traumas, and that type of stuff. And so the world outside of my skin was a pretty anxiety producing place. And my background, I didn't come from, no one in my family was even a reader, much less into philosophy or meditation or anything like that. And oddly, I stumbled upon just overheard a conversation one time as a teenager of someone mentioning if they could eat dinner with anyone, who would they be? And one of the names they said was Nishi. And I remember thinking, well, that sounds like a cool name. And a little while later, I was walking through a bookstore and saw that word on the back of a book, and was like, oh, that's interesting. And I went over and pulled it out and looked at it. I was like, all right, this is like how I think. It's not what I think, but it's kind of the math of how my mind works. This is really fascinating. That led me to become obsessed with Western philosophy. And then after that, due to, kind of some of the Western philosophers that had created bridges to Eastern philosophy, someone like Schopenhauer or various other people. I started reading Eastern philosophy, and whenever I did that, I was like, oh, this is not only how I think, but it's what I think. And that led me to meditation, different techniques, and I've become very fascinated with the brain and consciousness because I kind of had this Viktor Frankl moment of amongst the anxiety and negativity of my environment, I realized that my inner life was mine, and that uh, the world in my body was my sanctuary. And I started practicing meditation just from reading out of various books, and started feeling relief. Started feeling like, okay, I feel like I'm better than I was yesterday, and just was able to continue to take steps and undo my inherited programs, undo my inherited patterns and the cultural and family reinforcements around me, and begin to find more peace and release the frustration and start to feel comfortable within myself and what have you. And so it was really a matter of becoming an obsessive autodidact, just reading every book I could on meditation, on Eastern thought, and just getting in the lab and experimenting. And to your question about style, I'm kind of anti-organization and anti style, like hard stylizing in a lot of ways with pretty much everything, but definitely with philosophy or meditation as well. And I think it's great and important to learn all of the systems, but then pull the walls up and extract what resonates with you and what works for you and turn it into something custom for yourself. And then that also gives you the space to contribute your own ideas and your own felt experiences to your own system and come up with something unique. And so that's what I did over the course of, 20 years. I guess I'm still doing it, really.
There's this famous yoga teacher, long deceased, named Shivananda, and he wrote like 200 yoga books. And he's kind of this goofy, jolly, big-bellied guy, and he has tons. He's like the king of one-liners. He wrote 200 books, and they're all just kind of crazy stream of consciousness rambling. And but he has all these one-liners which always stick with me. And he has this one where he says, if you teach a yoga asana class, like poses, it'll be totally full. If you teach a pranayama class, a breathing class, it'll be half full. If you teach a meditation class, you'll have one or two people. And I always thought that was hilarious and just so true. I've operated studios now for 16 years or something like that. It's just so true. It's how people are interested. And it's easy to get people to move, well, easier to get people to move. It's more challenging to get them to sit still and do something with their hands and their breath, but very difficult for people to actually sit down and do nothing. And the interest in meditation, at least in my life, has never been bigger. There's apps all over the place. Everybody in my office has a couple of apps on their phone. People are buying books, and news anchors are turning into meditation teachers, and there's pop-up meditation centers and things like this. The only thing that really sticks with me is this Shivananda concept that people actually practicing is still pretty low. And definitely in my world, yoga world, people talk a good game, but they don't really sit their butt down on the cushion. And so I'm just curious if you have any thoughts about this. Everybody who comes on the show talking about meditation, I always pop this question, but like compliance is so low, like shockingly low in the meditation community. And I know some serious people. I mean, I had one buddy who spent 300 of 365 days in silence. And so I don't think I'm wrong. But it's a really curious thing to me when you have this massive interest and really, really low practice rate. It's sort of like abstinence or something. Like, what a wonderful idea. Or is it? Like, is anybody actually interested in that?
Right.
What are your thoughts?
Yeah, man. I mean, I think that once again, the reason why a lot of people have a hard time sticking to the practice is because of the overcomplexification that has come through kind of how meditation has worked its way into the mainstream. It's like, of course, there were originally Eastern thoughts that were translated into Western thoughts. A lot of important people helped create that bridge. But then, as what happens with most things in American culture is they become kind of commodified and hallmarkized or memeified, and so you get a bunch of really nebulous, sort of imprecise or almost commercialized or things that are very much style over substance. And so that there's this whole characterization of what meditation is, what it means, how it should exist in your life. And so that's why, people have this idea of like, oh, I'm not doing it right. Also, of course, living in a like our capitalist, buy more to be happy type of, you're not good enough, so continue to buy more. You're never good enough, so buy more. We have 1,000 ads a day telling us that we aren't enough. So if we were to buy a thing, we might fill that hole and become enough. So our inner critic is always, ready and well attended to any of our experiences. And so people go to meditate and they think, well, I want to do this. I feel anxious. And that's just a raising a collective self-awareness, due to the internet, I think, to a degree. So people are realizing, wait, I'm anxious. I feel frazzled. I feel fragmented. I feel like in this momentum of distraction. So like, well, meditation's popular. Let me try that. And then they sit down and then they're like, okay, so I think I just sit here, close my eyes, and I try and breathe for like 10 minutes. But they're like, oh, well, my mind was going crazy the whole time. And I've had, a bazillion people tell me this. They're like, my mind was going crazy the whole time. I realized I just must not be doing it right, and I must not be the type of person that can meditate. And then they stop, or they try it again, and they have the same experience, and they stop. And, for me, and I guess it sounds like you had the same experience, I learned to meditate from reading a bunch of books. It's kind of pre-Google, pre-YouTube. And it was always described as this thing that like, this is a long process that you feel benefits from it immediately, but it's something that can deepen literally for your entire life. It's not something that you just get, whenever people tell me they're certified meditation teachers or they went and got certified, I'm like, how long was that class? 30 years? So anyway, people like expect it to be like intensely transformative on the first time, and they think that they're doing it wrong, and so they stop. And so, that's why in my book I put this section just to kind of let me pause and give a bit of background really quickly. Essentially, I have been meditating myself for about 20 years, and I started talking about meditation on my podcast and in various other podcasts and places about 5 years ago. Because of that, I got a lot of interest from listeners asking me to do workshops or guided meditations or things like that. So I started doing workshops in Austin. They were crazy. They were selling out and were just like packed. There would be 80 people in every single one. And it's like people coming, a bunch of people in their 20s coming at 2 p.m. on a Saturday to a 2-hour long meditation class was a beautiful thing. And so in my book, I intentionally put out this chapter called On Meditation. So it's not about how to meditate per se. It's about meditation in general that sets you up to meditate and experience it for yourself. But one of the important things about that I put on there is that there's been so much written and said about meditation that we have a lot of misconceptions about it, and it's important to lower the stakes, to start simply, and consistency is key, and don't overcomplicate it. Humans have this habit of we want to overcomplicate everything so that we can get our fingerprints on it and essentially chip a piece of our ego off into everything. But just let it be what it is, keep it simple. And then this issue that is probably the most common issue, other than just consistency, of people trying to meditate one time and then saying, like, oh, well, my mind was going crazy. I say to that, like, you actually just achieved the hardest part of mindfulness practice, is that you became aware of your thoughts. That's all you did. And now it's a matter of just consistency will let the steam out of the teapot over time. Those thoughts will, detox essentially and calm down, and you'll come to a place where you have a fluid, cyclical feedback loop of arising and expressing as far as how your consciousness flows. And as far as while I'm talking about it, I might as well talk about the consistency thing. Is people want to meditate, but as you mentioned, their compliance levels are pretty low, even if they mean well. And I always recommend just like make it a part of your routine, like build it into your schedule. Just like, you don't have to remember to brush your teeth, hopefully. You just do it automatically every night. You don't have to remember to take a shower every day. You just do it. And it's because it gets built into this part of your day. And with meditation, I think it's key to, again, like lower the stakes. Don't create a bunch of barriers where you have to, get all set up and do all this other stuff. Just make it where there's like you could have a single pillow sitting on your floor next to your bed. And okay, you get up, you go take a shower, then you come, you sit down for 5 minutes. That's it. You just breathe, close your eyes, relax your hands. And essentially, I would say for anyone listening that is trying to start meditating or is finding it too difficult, really just like put your phone down, flip it over so the screen isn't there, whatever. Just sit down, close your eyes, start breathe in like life or whatever that means to you, a feeling of life force, breath. And as you exhale, relax the muscles in your face and your arms and your body. And breathe in more life. Breathe like you're sleeping, slowly, without resistance. And exhale, relax all the muscles in your body once again. And that's it. And just do that for 5 minutes. And do that every morning of Monday through Friday. Take the weekend off if you want. And just watch how you slowly start feeling less fidgety. Your mind becomes more focused, more calm, more clear. You start being able to respond to what comes at you in life as opposed to reacting based upon your past experience. And that's really the pathway to beginning. This is the beginning steps to being able to author your future.
There's a lot of stereotypes about meditation, as you mentioned, whether it's the guru from India or whether it's the guru from San Francisco, whoever it is. And, a lot of it, there's a couple of misconceptions that I think people have. One is this idea that meditation is something that comes down upon you. In my yoga world, people talk about like Kundalini rising and all kinds of other silliness. And the reality is, like, at least in my meditation experiences, and I'm not super well trained, but, I've spent 35 days of my life on my butt in a dark room. And it's pretty significant. Maybe it was more, maybe about 39, I guess, all in. And there was no angels, there was no Kundalini rising. At the end of it, I'm so incredibly sober and present that it's kind of disturbing. And it is definitely a skill. And this is the other thing that I think people forget is that we have this tendency in all cultures for mysticism and magical realism and exaggeration and the esoteric. And at least from my experiences, could just be an amplification of my personality, I'm not sure, but it just gets really, really sober, like just really, really real. I did a 3-day meditation sit with S.N. Cuenca before he passed away, and it was just a huge one. It was one of the last ones he did. And I was with a buddy of mine who had just come off a 35-day silent, and he was clearly in another place. And when I say that, immediately people think he's up in the clouds. And it's just the opposite, just so ridiculously boring and clear and grounded and incredibly present. And, I just felt like every word I said was just a little bit wasted. He was so present. But anyway, I was in a room with probably 350, maybe more, maybe even 500 people. It was a huge room. And you could really feel it. They were more adept at meditating than most of the other rooms I've been in. And what does that really mean? Well, all of the things you mentioned, they can sit still better, they can relax their minds better, but there's also there is a visceral feeling of being around people who are truly present in a room that you don't realize you haven't experienced in so long. People will sit across from each other and share a meal. I certainly do this with your significant other, and you're totally just not there. People will come to my yoga classes, the whole class goes by, they're just not there at all. Like literally their mind is somewhere else. And when you're in a room full of people who are everybody's there, like just there, present, being with each other, and there's no God, and there's no chants, and there's no spirits, and there's no angels from the clouds. It's just like, can you sit alone in a room for an hour and not move? It's such a ridiculously simple ask, and yet the answer is usually no. And so for me, that was the biggest game changer for me when I really got deeper into my meditation practice. Is just really understanding that the deep work is really challenging and at times really uncomfortable, and that what you're moving towards is not this esoteric magical state where you walk around and everything's sparkling like you're on LSD or something, but instead it's just this really sober reality where you can think clearly, you can make decisions better, your emotions aren't ruling every single thing you do, still most of your things, but it was quite a big revelation for me.
One of the things I put in the book is that you meditate every night while you're asleep. This trick to this is just doing the same thing while you're awake.
Well, great, Cory. It's awesome to have you on the show. I don't think we've done anything on binaural beats or music, at least not in a really long time. And like you said, there's a huge interest in it. In fact, back 2003, 2005, everybody was talking about it, and suddenly it's kind of been a resurgence. So it's cool to see it come back. I know some people will want to check out your audios, follow your work, pick up your book. Where's the best place for us to send them to?
Yeah, you just Cory-Allen.com. It's got links to the podcast, to the binaural beats, to the meditation course, my book, and everything's there.
Back in 2005 and 2006, I was running and eventually owning a yoga studio, and we had a big problem. We needed to staff up. We needed to hire more teachers, and we just couldn't find qualified applicants. Literally, we would put out a job ad, we'd interview a bunch of people, and most quote-unquote certified teachers just couldn't teach a good class. So we started in-house trainings. In fact, my first 2 courses, there was no paying people at all. We actually sponsored people to take the course, and we hired them, and they became teachers, many of whom are still teachers today, all these years later. And in 2006, we opened up our first course to the public and started training professional teachers, and we used this same approach. The idea was we want people job ready by the end of the course so that we can hire them, or that somebody can hire them. And interestingly enough, this was one of the only courses in the world that was actually training professional teachers. Most yoga courses, you sing some songs, you eat some lentils, and you get a certificate. At our course, you actually learn professional skills: public speaking, applied anatomy, nutrition, physiology, all of the skills that local yoga students are looking for. That's why our graduates are among the highest paid, most employed, most successful teachers in the world. This year we have our 4,000th graduate completing our programs, and it's one of the things that brings me the most joy in all the work that I do. We have a bunch of programs I'd encourage you to check out if you're thinking about becoming a yoga teacher in 2019, and all of them can be found at yogateacherscollege.com, yogateacherscollege.com/calendar to see all of our upcoming events. We have courses as short as 1 week and as long as 6 months, and we even have online training programs for those of you who can't travel to train with us. Hope that's helpful, and I look forward to talking with you more and hopefully training with you sometime in the future here in the upcoming year. This week's nutritional tip is in response to listener Tegan's question. She says, "Hey Lucas, I am wondering what's the best oil to cook with? What's the best oils or fats to eat throughout the day? I get really confused." Great question. This comes up a lot. We've chatted about this a lot in the past, but it's one you have to constantly revisit because food marketers are constantly repackaging these industrial oils and trying to sell them to you as food. So here's the deal. In the low-fat, heart-healthy 80s and 90s, the mainstream media and doctors and even things like the CDC and the World Health Board, all these big health agencies, they all convinced us that we needed to reduce saturated fat and eat polyunsaturated fat, things like canola oil, corn oil, soy oil, sunflower, safflower, all those beautiful, yellow, cheap, colorless, tasteless oils you find in the supermarket that cost like $1 a bottle, right? They're super cheap. And this is why everyone uses them. Well, they came from the painting industry. These are industrial oils. They were used to treat wood. They were used as part of industrial architecture and things like this. It's a really bad idea to start eating them. There's nothing wrong with an oil from a sunflower seed. What's wrong is about the way that it's processed and the way that it's stored. These oils are rancid by definition before you even open the bottle. These are very, very unstable oils. You can't just put them in a clear plastic bottle and sit them on the shelf. So here's the deal, Tegan. When you look at any traditional culture, if you look in most of Asia, they traditionally cooked with coconut oil or lard, lard rather. If you look in North America, traditionally cooked with butter or tallow. If you look in parts of India, they cooked with ghee, for example, which is a saturated fat. Saturated fats dominated cooking oils for centuries, and it's only recently that these cheap oils have become ubiquitous. So what are saturated fats? Well, they're the ones that are solid at room temperature. So in a normal room, when I lived in Southeast Asia, I used to tell people that, and they'd say, well, none of my coconut oil is ever solid. It's always liquid because it was always 30 degrees Celsius or warmer. But coconut oil, butter, ghee, tallow, lard, those are all saturated fats. And the saturation, that term refers to the hydrogen bonds, which refers to its stability with heat and light and oxygen exposure. So it's a pretty stable oil. It's pretty stable, right? Some people even leave a stick of butter out on the counter. They don't even put it in the refrigerator. I don't do that, but people do that, and it's totally fine. It's perfectly fine. It's a pretty stable fat. And then we get into the monounsaturated fat region, and that's primarily olive oil. That's kind of the big winner in that category. Olive oil is a great oil. I live in Catalonia in Spain, and we have great olive oil all the time. It's really cheap. It's just as cheap as those cheap seed oils where I live, but it probably is not where you live. And we get it all the time. It's really fresh. Just because you're buying olive oil in the store doesn't mean it's good olive oil. Where I am, it's highly regulated, and olive oil is everywhere. It's really cheap. It is good oil all the time. But where you live, especially if you're in North America, you could be buying olive oil that's cut with canola oil. You could be buying olive oil that's 3 or 4 or 5 years old. And when I lived in Thailand, for example, we would get olive oil, and it was very, very old, and it wasn't stored properly, meaning it would come in a clear bottle instead of a dark bottle, and it was often heat processed instead of cold processed. Olive oil is relatively stable, but not nearly as stable as your saturated fats. Can you cook with it? Yes, but it should be low temperature, and you need to treat it with care, and you shouldn't have a bottle of olive oil in your cupboard for 3 years. 6 months max. Even less is ideal. In my house, we buy olive oil in 5-liter jugs, and we go through them every couple of months. In a healthy home, you should be having lots of fats. I always talk about modern eaters as lipid hunters, and olive oil is one of the great ones. And coconut oil, I always have a lot of too. I usually buy 2-liter, 3-liter jars of it. If you order oils online, by the way, they're way cheaper if you buy them in bulk. And for your saturated fats like coconut oil and your monounsaturated fats, assuming you're actually using it, it's a really good way to go. Then we move into polyunsaturated fat land, and that would be things like sunflower, safflower, corn, canola, soy. Again, just walk in the supermarket next time you're there and just walk down the oil aisle. All those yellow oils, they're all polyunsaturated oils. They come from plants, they come from seeds, they come from flowers, they come from grasses, and they are super cheap. They taste good in pretty much everything, and they're rancid, and it's one of the most dangerous foods in the grocery store. Aside from processed sugars and things like that and processed starchy foods, these are arguably even more dangerous. The thing about fats, unlike sugar, which your body, of course, responds poorly to, but your body can deal with it. In fact, your body has a really high tolerance for sugar abuse if you look at the way that we eat. But unlike sugar, which your body can figure out ways to deal with, your body doesn't do great with these damaged fats. So let's say you have a canola oil, and you have this rancid fat, and this fat is actually absorbed into your body, and it blocks cellular respiration, so the movement and passing of nutrients and things on a cellular level. So it's a really big deal when these really lousy fats get incorporated into your body, and you start to build up a lipid profile with rancid fats. It's a terrible idea. And this is why, again, I come back to this lipid hunter idea. When you go out there in the wild, wild west, which is the grocery store, hotels, restaurants, schools, prisons, wherever you might end up, hopefully not in prison, you will be really hard pressed to find good fats. So I'm always on the lookout. Whole food fats are always a safe bet. Nuts, seeds, avocado, durian, these kind of natural food fats are always a safe bet because when they come in that natural container, they're usually not rancid. Nuts and seeds, of course, they still can be rancid. And then from there, when we move into processed fats, we want to treat processed foods with care, like we would any processed food. And so if we're talking about a polyunsaturated seed oil, like a sesame seed or something, like flaxseed oil, chia seed oil, amazing oils. These are almost medicinal. They're so nutrient dense, but they need to be treated very carefully. Dark bottle, refrigeration, no oxygen, eat them fresh, eat them quickly. You cannot buy a bottle of sesame seed oil that's been on the counter in a glass bottle at an Asian market or something like this, it's been toasted, for example. That oil is completely toxic. It's going to cause inflammation. It's going to screw up your cellular respiration almost immediately. And it tastes great, but it's not good for you. Fat is confusing because it can be totally rancid and still taste great. And you already know this because you've had French fries or deep fried something at some chip shop, and they have the same oil that they've been using for 3 months. That oil is industrial at this point. This oil is so gross you would not use it to lubricate a chain on your bike, and yet put a bunch of potatoes in there, tastes delicious. So your taste really lies to you. That's not true with protein. It's not true with carbs. Carbs, of course, will ferment, and you can smell it. You can smell that sort of sour smell. With protein, whoa, like a rotten egg, for example, or a rotten piece of chicken, the smell of rancid protein you respond to immediately. But fat doesn't have that reaction. This is why you can have really, really old fat, like aged meats and things like that, and the fat doesn't smell bad, doesn't look bad. It's very palatable, but it's still very, very dangerous. So really long answer, Tegan, but here's the deal. All fat is good fat. The only bad fat, cooked fat, processed fat, rancid fat, or fat that hasn't been stored properly. Unfortunately, that's most fats. And so you want to cook primarily with saturated fats, coconut oil, lard, tallow, ghee, these kinds of things, butter. You want to cook sparingly with olive oil, which is a relatively stable monounsaturated fat, and you want to never cook with polyunsaturated fats. This is the polar opposite of what everybody does. Everybody cooks with polyunsaturated fats, and then they rub the butter on their bread or something like this. So you want to flip the script and do it the opposite. And with your polyunsaturated fats, you're better off not eating them at all, only eating them in whole food form. So instead of having sunflower oil, just have sunflower seeds. Or if you get the oil, make sure it's dark bottle, refrigerated, and fresh. Has to be that way. Otherwise, it's already rancid for you. Long answer, but hope that's helpful. If you're a listener and you have nutritional questions, movement questions, yoga questions, send them in at yogabody.com/Ask Lucas. We have a listener question this week from Tanya, and Tanya asks, Lucas, do you ever use PNF stretching to gain flexibility? PNF is a funny term. It stands for proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation. I don't know who came up with this name. It's a terrible name. But basically, it's a contract and relax practice where, let's say you're working on the splits, you would contract your quads really, really strongly for 10 seconds and then release and relax for 10 or 20 seconds. It's really effective for turning off your stretch reflex, for overcoming your nervous system's response against stretching, the fighting response of your body. It's not useful for every pose, but there's some poses it works really great for, and the splits is one of them. It's called PNF stretching, PNF, proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation. And yeah, I'm a fan. I don't use it a lot. It's one of these nervous system tricks, and sometimes it can be helpful if you are really, really feeling wound up and you feel like you can't get into a stretch, or in poses where the stretch reflex is particularly strong. Frontal splits, side splits, those are the ones that I will often use it in. So I appreciate the question, and yeah, I'd encourage you to play around with it. We don't teach it or use it that much in our programs, but it is something that's worth exploring.
This week's iTunes review is by Janet from Chicago in the USA. Janet writes, I usually hear one or two interesting ideas in a podcast that I can integrate into my daily life. I trust Lucas because he is thorough in his research and honest about his perspective. Thank you, Janet. You have won the Yoga Trapeze. Email us at podcast@yogabody.com and we'll ship it to you.
If you're a regular Yoga Talk Show listener, you'll definitely want to get on my email list. Go to yogabody.com/sign me up. When you enter your email address there, we always have free giveaways every month. Yoga straps, water bottles, discounts in our shop, and all kinds of other things. When you sign up at yogabody.com/sign me up, I'll send you just one email a week with updates about the show, special offers, new courses, and valuable information that I think you'll find useful. So go to yogabody.com/sign me up to claim your free prize now.